Like many of you, I've had questions about BDSM for a long time. I've had preconceived ideas of what it was and wondered how it fits into my faith and the style of intimate play my wife and I enjoy. I also have received emails and DMs from many of you listeners asking me about BDSM in the context of a faithful Christian marriage. I've been hesitant in doing an episode about this for a long time until I found the right guest. I used to think BDSM was dark and evil, a thinly disguised form of rape, aggression, and violence. I also thought it was antisocial if it was about enjoying inflicting pain on others in some sort of a sick and twisted way. But then again, even a couple in a vanilla missionary position sex could be doing it with dark and evil intent. In short, it's not really the act, but why you're doing the act is what really matters. Then again, even vanilla missionary position sex, or BDSM for that matter, can be done in a loving, faithful, beautiful, playful, and deeply erotic way that deepens a couple's connections like nothing else can, facilitating and forging a bond so strong it creates an unbreakable marriage. After listening to this episode, you may want to try some of the fun suggestions to enhance the joy and intimacy in your marriage. I met Alan and his lovely wife, Leila, through a men's group that I belong to. They're a faithful, wonderful, and upstanding couple, married for nearly 3 decades. I'm very grateful that they were kind and courageous enough to come here to share their experience with BDSM with me. They answered many of my questions, and I hope you find this episode really insightful too. Note that this is going to be a 2-part episode. You'll hear part 1 today, and next week I'll release part 2. Now I have 3 quick announcements before you get to meet my guests. First of all, as of this recording, we have just 3 spots left for our in-person couples retreat in St. George, Utah. This is ideal for couples in an otherwise happy marriage but wish to make intimacy their strongest part of their relationship. Our retreats are romantic, fun, as well as transformative. Learn more on our website or click on the link in the show notes. Second, we're putting on a virtual retreat over Valentine's Day, Friday and Saturday, February 14th and 15th. This is where you will join me live in the comfort of your home or hotel in 3 sessions over 2 days. I'll walk you through a sexual practice over the 2 days designed to really be deeply connecting, relaxing, very romantic, and very erotic also. And this will be an unforgettable Valentine's Day for you. Details are on our website, or the link is in our show notes too. Lastly, if you're looking to accelerate growth in yourself and in your marriage this year, our men's only and women's only small group coaching program is just for you. The next cohort starts January 22nd. We meet weekly for 12 weeks to do a deep dive into the intimacy of your marriage, and this includes a comprehensive course, all materials, and coaching to help you apply everything you learn. You'll walk away from this 3-month program a better husband or wife, empowered to take your marriage to the next level. Leila and Alan, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Dan. We're glad to be here.
Glad to be here.
Can you tell me of a meaningful experience you've had where you were probably in a funk, and what did you do to get out of it?
There was this one time when I was very anxious. It had just been really stressful and my body had a lot of tension in it. And so I asked my husband if he would do a flogging session with me. And when I feel like, so one of the things that we do is, I go pick out the ones I want him to use on me that day. And we have this one, I have nicknamed it the pain flogger. And, so I only get that out occasionally, but I definitely wanted it that day.
Only on special occasions. I see.
Yes.
It's like a tool for a specific purpose.
Yeah. It's more stingy, so it hurts more for me anyway. And so, we're going through our normal routine, and he of course asks me again, like, you want this? And I said yes. And so he delivers what I'm asking for, and I think I even asked for more that day, or a little harder kind of thing. And 'cause I that day I needed it hard enough to make me cry.
Mm-hmm.
And once I can release, and then all that tension and stuff just was released from my body. And then when I'm ready, then I just say, okay, that's enough, stop. And so, I'm completely in control of what he's delivering to me, but it helped me be more calm and release all that physical sensation and tension.
Yeah, you know, we tend to hold like stress and fear, anxiety often in the body.
Oh, yeah.
And, and so by having an embodied experience, which is something that something like a flogging session can deliver if done correctly, it absolutely can help someone release and process emotions. And I certainly never expected that when I started learning about things like flogging. But it is definitely a way that I have worked with. We've worked together, and I've seen it work with other people too, where they're able to process and release, emotions basically. So she's not normally one for pain. Most of the floggers that we have are very soft leathers, like moose hide, for example, and they're heavy, so they deliver this kind of somatic impact, almost like deep tissue massage, right?
Mhm.
And she loves that, right? It's a very sensational experience. It's pressure on the body. It feels really nice, actually. Uh,
I'd call that I call it a thuddy feeling, and I relate that to kind of like a massage.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, and so that's kind of and there's a process. We start soft and work gently, and then at some point you work to that. We for that scene and most of them that we do for impact play and flogging specifically, is that it's done to music, so it's almost like a dance.
Mhm.
It's very rhythmic, and then sometimes there's a pause. You might drag the soft leather falls across the body. So it's a mix of physical impact as well as sensations, if that makes sense.
Got it. So this is a world I get lots of questions on in my email. Anonymous questions sometimes too about BDSM. Is it okay? What is it? And I'm so excited that we're talking about this today. Can you tell me, first of all, when I think of BDSM, I think of like 50 Shades of Grey. I admit I have never seen the movie or read the book before, but I understand the concept. And when I think about it, I think about taking pleasure out of inflicting pain and torturing another person. But I, from the story you're telling me, I don't think that's what's really going on. Is there a better way to think about it?
I think so. So first off, people within the broader kink world and people that are BDSM serious practitioners really dislike 50 Shades of Grey.
Uh huh.
E.L. James, in many ways, misrepresents the foundational concepts.
Uh huh.
And the way it plays out, in fact, we were a friend of ours, actually, we were discussing this, and he's a little more experienced than we are out of the UK. And he sent us a little video. It's a whole article where there's 17, like ethical violations
Uh
in
huh.
the movie, right?
Uh huh.
So realize that you're right. That's often an introduction into some of the concepts, but it's really misapplied in that by the author of the books, and in turn in the movies. You know,
Gotcha.
there are elements of sensualism, no question, which is something that can be included, but it also doesn't have to be. And so, yeah, primarily it's not at all about delivering pain, unless in the example she gave, that's specifically what someone is asking for, and it's for a purpose.
Uh huh.
I do not take any personal pleasure in that at all.
Uh huh.
Now, maybe there's people that do,
Uh
but
huh.
we've rarely seen that with anybody we've talked or interfaced with.
I think BDSM is a umbrella term
Uh huh.
for anything in that's not vanilla, or you could also substitute the word, anything kinky,
Yeah,
Okay.
which is anything not vanilla,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Uh
I
huh.
think if you think of it in those terms and not as in pain and sadism and masochism,
right.
those kinds of things, that's a better way to think of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate. I've met very few people that I would say are like masochists, and even if I did, or sadists, and they don't really take pleasure from the pain. Mostly what we've experienced, and in people we've talked to, and reading and learning as best we can about this, um, is that it's really primarily about power exchange.
Uh huh.
You know, it's really about someone being able to take responsibility for the care, safety, etc., and someone else to voluntarily agree to the terms of that and release their responsibility and step into receiving, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So how is that power play like Disney movies then?
So, yeah, this is an example I try to explain to people. So, whether you take Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Sleeping Beauty, or Shrek, um,
Uh-huh.
they're all versions of this idea of a princess who wants to lay back and receive, princess treatment. Of course, the ultimate one, Sleeping Beauty, there,
Uh-huh.
um, in some version of that, and a strong, Prince Charming character.
Mhm.
He may be flawed, right, in some ways, but he's essentially a strong male who's dominant, who in many ways the magic kiss, right, knows how to touch her, all those kind of things.
Uh-huh.
But it's this idea of a strong, caring, but also assertive man who's coming to protect her, to take care of her, to again to romance her. All of that stuff is wrapped up in it. And what's interesting to me is more I've learned about the principles around BDSM in particular, is that that's really what you're stepping into those roles.
Gotcha.
You're stepping into each of those roles
She's
by
the
intentionally.
princess, he's the Prince Charming. Uh-huh.
Yes,
Right. In a
in
way.
a yes, right? And so there's again, as Carl Jung would say, like that's an archetypical human story,
Uh-huh.
right? If you look across whether it's Greek tragedies, Roman stories, Viking, Celtic stories, like there's elements of that in almost all those stories, sort of the Prince Charming princess story, right? It's not just Disney, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is
yeah.
a human, seems to be for a lot of people, a human experience. So there's certainly a variety, right? We're all on a spectrum
Uh-huh.
of things. There's some people that would say, "Oh, that's crazy. I don't want that." Cool, that's great. But largely, and when you look at data and information, particularly about women and what they want in sort of the fantasy world, things they might want, I've seen various ones, whether it's Kinsey or a few others, but they almost all report some version of an assertive or more dominant experience in the bedroom, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the same
Oh,
data.
yeah. Uh-huh.
It's really common. And so this is a way to formally step into that kind of dynamic, right? If that
Gotcha.
makes sense.
So the appeal is it's the power play. It's the I get to
Can
be a
be.
princess and to be pampered to and
If
kinda
it
uh-huh.
yes, and
Right, right.
there's lots of different things you can do, right? That's the thing. That's one dynamic.
Uh-huh.
But yes, that's one that I think commonly appeals to people, right? I think particularly when you come, for example, from those of us from a more conservative Christian background, we often enter our marriage and relationships with some very role-based ideas, and sadly for a lot of women, they don't they're not comfortable stepping into receiving like sexually and receiving erotic energy, right?
Right.
It's this they're constantly managing and limiting, right?
Yes.
The withdrawer, pursuer, HTP, LDP, depending on the language that you're looking at.
Mhm.
And frankly, this is a way to step out of that dynamic,
Gotcha.
right?
Uh-huh.
It's a way to intentionally, go, okay, I have to, like for the woman anyway, in this case, and it can be either way, but we practice it kind of that way. So we typically talk in those terms, but it can be reverse. And I've seen both. Um, but they're able to essentially let go of the stress, the anxiety, oh, my only options to receive. For example, if you're bound or restrained in some way with ropes or a silk tie or whatever, you're blindfolded, maybe gagged,
Uh-huh.
like you have to receive,
Right.
you know? So, and very various forms of those appeal to people and some freak people out. So that's
Mhm.
all part of negotiation. But you're negotiating and discussing a formal way for, in my case, for me to step up to take responsibility for her care,
Mhm.
right? For her safety. Like like if she's blindfolded, I'm responsible for her safety,
Right.
for example, right?
Mhm.
100%. And she has to be willing to trust and receive that. So it's a way to formally step up into kind of a giver receiver dynamic within a defined time.
Mhm.
So would you agree with kind of that framing?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that you can kind of think of it as a play almost. As
Uh-huh.
one person is going to play the role as the dominant, and one person is going to play the role of the submissive, and you each have your own roles to play. And it even helps to have different clothing you wear or not clothing, whichever way you're going. It's a form of play.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun. And so let's do some terminology. You just said the word dominant, submissive. I think inside the BDSM community, there's a lot of terms. Can we go through some of those terms real quick? What would you say is the
Yeah,
most
sure.
important concept people should know? If they're like me, they're like new to this, they're wanting to explore what the concepts are. Where do you begin?
So all of BDSM practice is based on consent. That is foundational. So before you get into the more complexities or interesting things, it's really about consent,
Okay, good to know.
right? Yeah, and so and sort of mutual, I would say like mutual consent.
Mm-hmm.
correct. There's some terminology that I teach frequently called fries.
Like
So
French
consent is
fries, right?
French
All
fries.
right.
Yeah. So consent is F, freely given.
Okay.
Okay. Which means it's not coerced. It's not, you can't give consent if you're in a power disparity, boss employee, for example, or some kind of dynamic like that. That's problematic. R is reversible, meaning consent can be revoked at any time. And that's critical because when you enter into a scene or something you agreed upon, right? The
Uh-huh.
steps of the dance, we've agreed to the dance, right? You can change your mind. Either party can,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
For example, in the example she gave about the pain flogger, sometimes she has trouble expressing her thoughts and feelings, and I know that. I've
Uh-huh.
had therapy and marriage stuff about it, and so in that situation, it took me a while to trust that I would turn the decision to stop the amount of discomfort or pain delivery, and it's not all pain, but some,
Uh-huh.
over to her,
Gotcha.
right?
Because you're
And
like,
so
no,
that's
I
actually,
know better. This is hurting her. I don't want to do this. But no, you
yes,
have to trust that she will say stop when she is ready. Uh-huh.
exactly. And so that's one of the critical things is that both sides can revoke consent
Gotcha.
or say, hey, I'm done with this piece. It doesn't mean everything's terrible. It simply means, hey, you know what?
I'm
We
good.
discussed this. I'm going to do it, but we got partway in and I changed my mind, and nobody can get pouty and upset. That's kind of the ground rules, right?
Right.
Is it's freely given and reversible. I is informed, meaning that you understand what the risks are, what the pros and cons are, what tools you're using, so you've kind of reviewed that. E stands for enthusiastic, this concept of enthusiastic consent, again, not coerced,
Uh-huh.
right? So it really should be yeah, I really want to try that. Now, she tends to not be super enthusiastic about things, and I tend to be the one that encourages variety. So, you don't always have like super enthusiastic consent, that different a bits person to person,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't ever want to coerce somebody.
Right.
Like it has to be very, hey, yeah, I'm willing to try that. Right? It
Mm-hmm.
can't be like, well, gosh, I guess,
Uh-huh.
like do that. And S is specific, meaning that just because we've agreed to a specific consensual arrangement about the time and what we're doing, it doesn't mean that automatically replicates that, forever after it. And to be honest, these are actually rules for sexual consent,
Yes.
but to be frank, the original models from Planned Parenthood actually about sexual consent. So I think one of the interesting things about marriage is we often come in with assumptions
Mm-hmm.
and don't sit and talk about consent. And that's not just for the receiver, that's for both sides,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Whether you're
You know,
practicing tying each other up in the bedroom or not, this is
yeah,
a fantastic that every married couple should be absolutely 100% on board with. Are we fully
I
consenting?
agree. In
Uh-huh.
fact, sometimes I wish even in our churches, we actually had I would replace discussions about some things like modesty with consent.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
I think it's a much more important principle in relationships that you know, we kind of take for granted, I guess, particularly in marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and we're sometimes afraid to talk about. So that's one thing about the whole practice of any of this kind of non-vanilla stuff. You can't make assumptions. You have to be specific, and it needs to be consensual,
Right.
you know,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Right.
So that's kind of the big one. So yeah, you'll hear the terms dominant and sub, and a lot of people misunderstand that. They'll think that submissive means the kind of biblical submit to your husband. That's
Uh-huh.
not at
Uh-huh.
all
Uh-huh.
what
Uh-huh.
it means.
Uh-huh.
So can
It
you?
it means more like the one being taken care of, I would say,
Uh-huh.
or the one being vulnerable
Yes.
Yes.
is more what the sub role, and it can be either gender. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't have to be just the female gender for sure.
Yeah, that's true.
Would you say this submissive person is where most of the attention is on in that particular moment?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes, they're the receiver. They are getting all the sensations.
Yeah. And they're not expected to necessarily reciprocate, right?
Right.
But it's by specific agreement that you enter into this dominant or responsible deliverer, the sort of deliverer receiver role, a giver and receiver role is kind of what you're stepping into. But it's also, like I said, a place where typically you've agreed that the submissive is going to listen to whatever the dominant suggests. But keep in mind, you've pre-agreed or mapped out the dance or the role play you're going to do, right? For us, and I think most people that we work with or talk to, that's really stepping into that play space, right?
Yes.
You're choosing to have a well-designed play, well-designed role play, or almost like this emotional and physical dance.
Another terminology I've heard instead of just dom sub is top and bottom.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you can also think of it like that too. And one more term that we should include is
Yeah.
called switch.
Okay.
So you can switch the roles. The woman can be the top and the man can be the bottom.
Yeah.
And
It's
even in we've met couples like that they take turns being top and bottom.
Uh-huh.
yeah. And
Gotcha.
nobody's all one or the other. There's actually a BDSMtest.org. I don't get any money for mentioning it, but it's just what everybody uses. And
Uh-huh.
you can answer a bunch of questions there. And so it's a place I often refer people who are searching for this. And at first, when you read it, there's some stuff that's like, what the heck? That's weird. But get over that and just, go
Uh-huh.
through it because it'll kind of give you some scores of where you score. And it's often surprising. So even though in our relationship and kind of in life, I play a more naturally dominant role, I
Mhm.
actually have a pretty high submissive score. In other words, I'm okay being the person being received, right?
Mhm.
Or receiving. We don't often play that way. That's just kind of not how it is for us. But like score wise, that's the case. And same thing for Switch, right? So it's not all one or the other. It's not binary choice. It's a whole spectrum.
Just to be clear, this is the playtime in your marriage. Outside of that playtime,
Right.
outside of the quote unquote bedroom here, we want a equally shared balance. We're partners in life. We're
Yep.
husband and wife. We're a team. We're together. We're
Yep.
side by
Yep.
side. It's just
Yep.
that when the door is locked and
Yep.
closed, we're
Yep.
stepping into a new play role that
Yes.
we both find appealing. And
Correct.
it's the damsel in distress and the knight on a shining horse. Whatever
Sure.
play out you're going to do,
Sure.
that's the idea. Dominant, submissive in this playful moment.
Yeah, and even though we have a lot of tools and we've been down this path for over a decade, kind of learning about and practicing personally, and now we're a little more public,
Uh-huh.
obviously,
Right.
and trying to teach and train about what we think are some good principles that appeal to some people. It doesn't mean we do that even all that often.
I
Quite
see.
honestly,
Uh-huh.
even like shit like a flogging scene or something, like I don't even know if we're like weekly. So
Uh-huh.
and yet sometimes it might be a couple nights in a row.
Uh-huh.
But there are elements of it that play out in how we interact in the bedroom.
Mhm.
Like she often prefers, even during some forms of sex, to be held down or restrained. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't take ropes. That's just body weight,
Right, right, right. Uh-huh.
for example, right?
Or to
So,
be spanked on the
or
bum or something fun.
yeah,
Uh-huh. Right.
when done correctly. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
spanking's a whole nother thing because it's actually impact with your palm. But
Uh-huh.
but yeah, and that's an example. She really likes that. I mean, I was actually watching football Sunday afternoon a couple weeks ago, and she kind of to get her phone and turned her cute rear end towards me, and I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "You okay if I kind of pat you here?" And she's like, "Yeah." And so I started giving her a little impact. Well, we've done enough of that. I know how to do it, and she likes it. She got quite aroused.
Uh-huh.
So it's on the sofa because the kids were downstairs.
That's
Do you
awesome.
like that?
Oh yeah, it was very good.
Right? So my point is a scene doesn't have to be complicated. Like
Mhm.
literally that's a scene.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm sort of multitasking, watching football and using my right hand on her bum, but you know, made her like football a little better. So, but that's I mean, it's kind of a silly example, but because we're comfortable with that, it was negotiated, consent was all given just in that very so it doesn't have to be complicated, right? I think that's one thing people look at and we talk about a role player stepping into that. They think it's complicated.
Mhm.
It's not. Like it can be really, really simple. It's really about honest and authentic communication about what you each want. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I heard a story about a woman. She works for a law firm, very masculine energy, high
Yep.
stress, telling everyone what to do all day, kind of a
Yep.
job. And comes home, and she had married a very good man, but he's also a very gentle man. And
Yep.
in the bedroom, oftentimes what was playing out is she's replicating what she's doing in the law office in the bedroom, and she's losing her desire to be sexual with her husband because he's a gentle guy, and in the bedroom he's gentle. And the last thing she wants is to tell her husband what to do to
Right.
her. So
Right. Right. She literally wants to be in that receiving,
yes,
taken care of place
right,
because she's
right,
stressed all day. Yeah.
exactly,
She wants to be restrained and
absolutely.
flogged. That's what
Right.
she wants.
So she told her husband, "I really want you to tie me up and have your way with me." And he had a hard time with that. Like,
Yeah.
that's not me. But go ahead. It looks like you're about to say
I was gonna
something.
say you can think of it like a play almost, like you're playing. I think we mentioned that earlier, but you can think of it like a play
Uh-huh.
where you're taking on just this role for this, this one-time event type
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
You could even have different clothes you wear, or you have a different voice you use, or that might help someone try to
Step into that
step into
role.
that role.
Uh-huh.
Think of it as a role and
Uh-huh.
and use your drama skills you learned in high school.
Yeah. So there are some times when she wants something rougher
Mhm.
than I normally give as husband. And so more than once I'll be like, okay, I called a guy
Uh-huh.
and
And
I
he's
will
gonna come
exit.
over. He's gonna
Yeah.
do this to
Right.
you.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Literally. And so I leave the bedroom.
Uh-huh.
I breathe and change my mindset.
Uh-huh.
I knock on the door, and then I
Uh-huh.
come in my mean Russian accent, and I am going to hold you down, and you are going to take it, right?
That's
So
awesome.
I mean, that might be TMI for some people, but that's an example of not only in my mindset, but literally in my actions and even voice,
Mhm.
I step out of who I am.
Right.
And this guy doesn't care about it, right?
Mhm.
Like he's
Uh-huh.
he's there to do his business and leave. And he leaves, and then I come back and, "Oh, honey, are you okay? I'm here to love you and aftercare," you know? So, but to your point, like she's saying, you literally can step out of into and out of those roles to either just in your mind a little bit or in a complete thing. And what you're describing about CEO types or type A directive personalities, super, super common for them to actually be submissive
Yeah.
when it comes to the bedroom. That's really, really common for men or women.
Mhm.
You know, and you might think it'd be reversed, which is like how it's portrayed in 50 Shades of Grey, which just isn't the case. Christian Grey is actually a submissive. Like if you know the story of the books at all, he was actually in a submissive relationship. So it's kind of weird that then they portray him as this quasi-dominant guy. It's just it's a mess.
That's one of those
Yeah.
non good things about this.
Yeah.
Inconsistent things? Okay. Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Exactly. But that's really, really common. And like I said, for the sort of dominant role, it's largely about confidence.
Mhm.
And you don't, what I would say to somebody is you don't have to be perfect at it,
Mhm.
right? It's really stepping. I mean, if you're doing, for example, a play, like you said, high school, college, whatever, you may not be perfect. You're not going to deliver all your lines perfectly, but this is like an improv play, right?
Yes, uh-huh.
So you're feeding off of each other to some degree, and you don't have to be perfect. And if you make a mistake and say, oops, that was wrong, or she can go, oh, that was too hard, oh,
Uh-huh.
okay, or that's too soft, right? So you do have to have some open communication. And again, I think that's something that's before we started practicing this, we probably weren't great at that in the bedroom, so to speak. But we're way better at it now, just saying, oh, I want this, I want that, I like this, I like that, that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
The term scene is one that we've used also. And that's really essentially anything you've agreed to do.
Okay. Uh-huh.
If that,
For a certain amount of time.
or a certain series of events, however long that takes. And another one that's critical is I think I mentioned is sort of aftercare. And it's been interesting to me in talking about this. I've been surprised at people that don't practice aftercare after just normal, even vanilla-ish sex.
Mhm.
But that really it's several parts. So it's talking about the experience or processing. So particularly for the giver, like or the dom, right, the top, I need feedback.
Mhm.
That's what helps me feel okay that whatever I've done was either good or that she enjoyed it. And so that's critical for me to soothe any of my concerns that I did it wrong.
Right. Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yep, or feedback. I probably did do it wrong, and now I know for next time. Right.
Well, yeah,
Uh-huh.
or not even wrong, but oh, I would have liked this differently.
Yes.
Or if you're using floggers and it's really easy to miss and it can wrap around the body and that really stings. And so, but that just happens once usually and you move on and you just realize you
Not good.
like one thing, sometimes it would hit my neck and over, multiple times. So we just got to where we put a towel on my neck or one of the soft floggers and then we don't have that problem anymore.
Mhm.
Right. Until I got better at accuracy, and now I'm good at
Pretty good.
accuracy.
Uh-huh.
So I think one thing that is critical, because BDSM doesn't have to involve sex at all. Realize any of the stuff you're practicing, people associate the two,
Uh-huh.
but it's simply one menu item on a very, very large and varied menu
Right,
of,
right.
of
Uh-huh.
possibilities, right? And often people wrap it up. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we'll do some sort of scene, and it may have erotic elements in it, but it's not necessarily sexual, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
You know, like even just grabbing her hair and kissing her against the wall, and then I let her go and I walk away.
Uh-huh.
Right? That is a form of sort of DS play,
Uh-huh.
you know, but it
DS
wasn't
meaning
sexual.
dominant, submissive. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. Right. Because I'm establishing my dominance by, by grabbing her hair and holding it, and see the smile. Sorry, your audience can't see it, but
Uh-huh.
you can tell she likes that.
Uh-huh.
And then, kiss her or whatever, and then let her go. But that's establishing sort of that DS dynamic, and and something for her. So the aftercare part's critical. For us, it normally involves like a lot of cuddling and talking. And often, but not always, we might transition then to some version of sex or sexual, engagement,
Mhm.
but not always. But the aftercare piece is critical, especially if there's been something like pain involved, or something that's outside of the norm that I'm going to struggle with. It's important that for me that she says, hey, I asked for it, I consented, I enjoyed it. Yeah, it hurt me a little bit, or even left a mark or a bruise, because that will happen.
Mhm.
um
Or
you know
can.
yeah, it can,
Some
uh,
people think that's a badge of honor too. They love the bruises.
I
So
that's
see.
true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, some people are more into the pain piece. She's not as much. We've definitely met and seen people that are, but it's, for me, it's important to process, not just did I do a good job, but I didn't do any harm.
Right.
And so one of the phrases that I use is I talk to the mind, the heart, and the body. And I review if there's, I actually will look and review if I've left any bruises or anything, and I'll address those bruises individually, and say, hey, I didn't mean any harm, or there was nothing, negative about it. I might rub or put salve on if it's a red mark that stays. Rarely they don't. We don't normally play that hard.
Mhm.
So that's pretty rare for us. But I'll make sure to the mind that and heart that nothing I did or said, even if it was rougher or in a different character, was from a place of anger,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
So that her psyche or emotions don't take on any of that as trauma or negative stuff. And so the aftercare piece is important.
and so your psyche doesn't take on that
Yes.
also. Like you're told you never hit a woman when you're younger, right? Like
Right.
you take care of them. So it kind of messes with your mind when you're being asked to hit a woman on
Yeah.
purpose.
Uh-huh.
You have to
And being
both be
told she
okay with
enjoys
that.
it.
Yes, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if that makes sense. So I do think the aftercare piece is one that's important, and it's helped us be better about it in our normal day-to-day relationship, right?
Mhm.
Frankly, negotiate prior to sex, even if it's quick and simple, and to make sure that the aftercare piece, to talk about it, not just, did you like it? Like, but more than that, what did you like about it, and what meanings does it bring to you? And like I said, from BDSM stuff, what we've noticed, particularly impact play and flogging, it often brings up feelings and emotional processing, and making time and space for that is pretty important, because
Mhm.
it's kind of expected, honestly. You don't think of it that way. You think of it as just delivering, sensations, and that can be an important part, but often it relates to emotional experience. So
I can see that. And in my mind's eye, I can see how the aftercare step you might spend just as much time there as you do on the actual play part too. So,
yeah,
We usually plan on half the amount of time that we did in the flogging scene in aftercare.
yeah.
got it.
Yeah, so because my typical flogging scene's about 40 minutes, actually, so
Mhm.
we're not talking. It's fairly extensive, and that's if it's just flogging. If there's sensations, or like rope, because rope is fun, but it takes a long time, so we don't typically do it.
Kind
Uh,
of its own activity, and it's not
yeah,
necessarily sexual.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's not. So we don't.
But there are people out there who love to be tied up, and it's
They
just their happy place.
Yeah, they melt. It's so interesting.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
just go, oh,
So let's say we touched on this briefly, but any tips for people that are shy, nervous to step into playing in this way, whether it's to be the one tied up or the one to have their way with a person that is tied up? Like,
well, I wouldn't use the term "have your way," because again, that's kind
uh-huh.
of the
Well, yeah,
reverse.
that's the
Is
That's
that
joke.
opposite of consent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right? Because
Uh-huh.
it's not "have your way," because it's literally not my way. So one thing that I think is misunderstood: the submissive is in control.
Okay,
Period.
I'm glad we're talking about this.
Does
So,
that make sense?
so this is like Leila saying, Alan, I want you to use this, and then I want you to use this, and I want you to use this, and this is how I want you to do it. Who's in charge? She's in charge, right? It's the submissive one is in charge of the scene always.
It is.
Uh huh.
Now I'm responsible to deliver it,
Uh
right?
huh.
You know, so um, I have to be skillful. I have to use so keep in mind too, you don't just negotiate what you do, you negotiate what you talk about.
Uh-huh.
You negotiate terminology.
Uh-huh.
What do you want to be called?
Uh-huh.
For example, do you want to be called, "Oh, you're my good girl,"
Uh-huh.
or and do you want to be called a dirty little slut? You
Right.
can't believe you just want this the whole time.
Uh-huh.
What? You know,
Uh-huh.
you
Right.
can see
You
she likes
respond.
both
Right,
of those.
exactly. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Right. So some people at first are probably not comfortable with some of those other terms, right? And
Mhm.
again, I think that comes from our puritanical background. And so actually being comfortable with terminology that you may not use, again, you're filling that role, right? That the dialogue you might use changes or can.
Mhm.
Doesn't have to, but it can, because you're not only trying to address the physical sensations, you're trying to address sort of the mental and erotic energy elements. It's a very energetic experience. And so I always try and be in the right like frame of mind, frame of heart, because that comes out in the energy I deliver with the tool and how I talk. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Mhm.
And I think that's off. To be honest, I think that's as you know, I'm in several other men's groups, and that's how we met. But as I've listened to other people's stories, and you get into the details about kind of what goes on in people's bedrooms, sometimes I think that exchange of erotic energy that and the willingness to give and receive is often a real block for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And by structuring this sort of ethical framework and this conversational framework around what you're going to do, again, consent, power dynamics, establishing roles, agreements, it's revocable. Like once you establish a safe space, you can take more risk
Mhm. Right.
be- because at any time, because you're safe,
Yes.
because at any time you can say, hey, I'm not into this. Or, hey, I'm having a lot of feelings. We need to stop and I need to cry.
Uh-huh. Right.
Right. Like that has absolutely happened.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
And when you're talking about the submissive or the bottom is in control, you're in control of what you're asking to be delivered. You're also in control, and you need to be in control of yourself when something's not going right. You have to be responsible to speak up and say something. And a lot of women just will, especially,
Grin and bear it, right?
yes,
Uh-huh.
take take it. And sometimes that's part of the play, is take more than you maybe normally would, and
Mhm.
that's okay. But when it becomes, when you cross whatever your line or threshold is, you need to be responsible and say, we need to stop. Or even if it's just something simple like, that's too hard, can you be a little softer? But it's your responsibility to stay safe.
Mhm.
yeah. And be open to that communication both ways. So yeah, I think that's a big misunderstanding. People look at it as, if I'm the dominant, I'm doing what I want. That's literally the opposite. I'm only doing what she wants. No
Yes.
more, no less.
That's called abuse, when you do what you want.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Got it.
So does that make sense? Yeah, and you're right. People phrase it, tie me up and do whatever. And I've had to listen to lots of people, and they'll say that, and I tell them I would never do something with you if you can't give me specifically what you want,
Mhm.
because it's literally the whole dynamic. In my opinion, the most ethical way to practice it is not about what the person who you're handing control over to do what they want. You have to be able to be, again, consent is specific, right? So
Right.
that's why consent is foundational and it's specific.
Right. That's the
And
S in
so,
fries. Mhm.
yeah, and a lot of people, and again, I've done a lot of training on this, and you're right. A lot of people, and frankly, women in particular, say, "Oh, just tie me up and do something." No, 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 no. That bottom or that submissive has the responsibility to be educated, right? Informed is one of them too.
Right.
She or he, if it's but has to be informed enough about what you're doing and understand. And so, like when I do teaching and training, I'll show people the tools. I might say, hey, would you like me to try this on your, leg or your arm to kind of show them what it's like so that they have some idea. And even if you're doing something that might be painful, you actually say, you might impact them, whether it's a spank or a flog, and go, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's that? And they'll say, oh, that's a 2. And I'll go, oh, that's a 3. That's a 4. And when I get up to say a 7, I'll be like, do you want any more than 7? No. Now I know how much physical force to deliver.
Mhm.
So that's an example of an exercise that that you commonly practice before you enter in a scene, so that someone's giving you consent and you know where the thresholds are of where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
So
And it can change over time. When we
yeah,
first started playing this, it wasn't much. I couldn't take very much. I can take a whole lot more now. And I want a whole lot more now.
yeah.
Got it. Got it. How do you approach your spouse about playing this way?
Oh, you know, I think go
Maybe don't use BDSM.
ahead.
Don't use that term, you mean?
Maybe you should say, "Hey, I want to do a role play with you."
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good one, because you're right. The initial reaction by everybody's, and I get it,
Uh-huh.
and so that's often why I use the term, kinky. I think if you're a typical male, of the kind of guys that we hang out with,
Uh-huh.
I would say something like, I would actually ask, instead of being about what I want, I'd actually ask something like, hey, I've read that a lot of women want something more assertive. Are you open to that? And she'll say yes. And I would ask, what does that look like for you?
Uh-huh.
In other words, the more you can get out of the sub, what they want, the better you can design what you're going to deliver. Does that make
Makes
sense?
sense.
And so again, it's consistent with the consent model, right?
Right.
And so and sometimes you have to really, really dig, because as she said, I think, again, because of kind of the puritanical background, a lot of women are told not to express their feelings, their fantasies. We're told somehow, getting this subconscious message that's terrible. And so there's definitely sort of philosophical and deprogramming to step into, what do you want,
Mm-hmm.
really?
Right.
And that's vulnerable, and I get it, right? And so you have to reach a place of maturity and security, with being safe, as asking that question. But that's one place I would start, is try and ask, what does that look like? And she may not know. And so then, like in her case, sometimes I'll say, okay, here's the menu. In fact, I used to have a physical menu I
Uh-huh.
made, pictures and
Appetizers,
description.
side
I did. I
dishes.
had appetizers, main course, dessert. I
Uh-huh.
had spice levels, and it wasn't about BDSM. It was actually about sex, before I get into this, but
Uh-huh.
because I'm a creative type.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah,
I've done
so
the same. Uh-huh.
yeah, I think it still sits in our bed, right? I even
Uh-huh.
printed out with little cute black and white pictures. And anyway, but I think the same thing's true. Is I can say, hey, would you like to do some sort of scene? And for us, it's mostly impact play and flogging, which involves a little bit of paddles or spanking, and then usually flogging, like I said. So that's normal. So we kind of have an established, what we do, 90% of the time when we are doing something. So it doesn't require a lot of negotiation. But yeah, I would start by not saying I want to be more kinky, although that's true. I might try and share those fantasies with your spouse. And the more they're willing to share, the more you can get into, oh, okay. And hopefully they ask you, or if not, you say, hey, is it okay if I share? Hey, I'd like to try this. But I think the case you mentioned is probably the most common one. Like I said, I've read and talked to a lot of women who really, really would like their spouse to be more assertive in the bed.
Yes.
It is very, like I said, innate.
Uh-huh.
I think for a lot of women, and to your point, we're sort of taught to be soft and gentle, and often as men, we're scared to step into our more masculine roles.
Right.
And so there's definitely some healing, I think, that you need. But yeah, I would start by trying to have that conversation, and then, like, we have a whole Facebook group, and there's actually lots of information on YouTube that's pretty tame. So there are places where you can go to discuss and learn about this, and if at all possible, connect to a community. I'm not a huge fan of FetLife. I've had very mixed experiences, but it is kind of the only place to connect there. I don't use it locally because, again, I do a lot of teaching and training, and so we have a whole group of people to kind of talk to. And so I've tried to develop a lot of resources that I share with people about that. But yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend go watch 50 Shades either. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be kind of a turnoff to a lot of people, I think. But really, it's about that. Would you like, more assertiveness, and, but learning about that's, there's not great resources for it, sadly. I mean, I wish there was. I'm like, I should teach a class, but I don't know what that would look like
Uh-huh.
exactly.
So it's something you got to practice, something you step into. You talk about,
It really is. And it's evolutionary.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, the first two floggers I bought were like cheap things off of, I don't know, it was Amazon or some, sex shop or whatever. And we tried it, and they were kind of terrible. it wasn't until I actually the first one we got, I got it in her favorite colors, which is purple, as you might guess
Uh-huh.
from what we're wearing.
Uh-huh.
Um, so and it was an elk hide flogger that was supposed to be soft, and it was expensive. Like good floggers, for example, are typically about $150 up of high quality leathers, Italian leathers. We have a rabbit fur flogger, like I have moose, I have elk, as
Uh-huh.
well as soft cow. And the pain one she mentioned, actually a bull hide flogger. And each one's finished differently and feels different,
Mm-hmm.
And so even something like flogging, like, I started a long time ago, and the first few times were awkward. And then
Mm-hmm.
I got better, and she realized, oh, she did like it, and we've sort of, it's been an evolutionary process for us, no doubt. And again, not that it's all about spanking and impact either. Like I said, just physically restraining somebody or being a little more assertive physically in the bedroom, I think is a place that a lot of people start, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Thank you for listening. This concludes part 1 of this episode. Stay tuned next week for the rest of our conversation in part 2. If you want a more meaningful sexual and intimate connection in your marriage, I invite you to check out my Get Your Marriage On program. Over 100 couples have said this program packs tremendous value and has helped their intimacy grow to the next level. Now, go get your marriage on.